All righty, Six Rings fans, we've got a very fun, very special episode for you today, coming all the way from PFF headquarters in the Queen City, the Natty, home of the New England Patriots' singular victory on the season. As we now try to consume as much Drake Maye analysis, Drake Maye feedback, Drake Maye reaction, Drake Maye content, we are proud to be joined by college football analyst for PFF and the host of PFF's college football show. Give him a follow at CFB Max Chadwick. It's the one and only Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus. Max, thanks for making a little time to talk the Drake with us today.
Of course, yeah. I love talking Drake Maye. So anytime you guys wanted to do that, I'm always more than happy to hop on.
All right, before we go footballs deep into the Drake, if you will, I just want to get give me one of those classic 10,000 foot sort of, what does PFF think of this current model or iteration of the New England Patriots? I can't imagine that it's like the lowest ranked PFF team of all time, but I can also not imagine that it's like breaking the model as of the moment.
No, yeah, it's definitely a team that's definitely not in win now mode, right? This is a team that's building for the future, and that's why you're seeing Drake Maye as the current starting quarterback for this team right now. They still have a lot of things they got to do to help him around him, which I think this upcoming NFL draft, if they do end up getting the number one overall pick like they're right now that they should use that pick to help him in any way possible, most likely on the offensive line, right? So you still see a team in New England that is still really struggling on the offensive line. They're the fourth worst team in pass blocking grade right now, the second worst team in run blocking grade right now. They need a lot of help around Drake Maye, and also the second worst receiving grade too, right? This is not a very good environment with a defensive-minded head coach in Gerard Mayo as well. So you don't have an offensive head coach, you don't have a good offensive line, and you only have a great receiving core. So it's not a great situation at all for Drake Maye to be going into. But that's also why they're not in win now mode, right? This is a team that's building for the future, and I think a lot of their resources in the draft and in free agency over the next couple of years should be allocated to that, fixing that offense and helping the supporting cast around Drake Maye. So yeah, it's not pretty, and right now they're the worst team in the NFL just in terms of where they're drafting. Right now they have the number one overall pick, like I said. We'll see if they end up with that number one overall pick, but yeah, this is a team that's obviously not in win now mode, right? Like I said, and this is a team that's clearly building for the future.
Yeah, we're currently embroiled in a debate on the airwaves of WEEI, as well as here on the Six Rings podcast, all Patriots focused, on the notion of, do fans even want to see the team win another game? Or would you rather they get that number one pick? They won't spend it on a quarterback. They would likely trade it away to a team that needs a Quinn Ewers or whoever else ends up going first overall. And then you could get that stockpiling vis-a-vis the way the Bears cashed in a couple of years ago with the Carolina Panthers. They get Bryce Young, then they get years of sadness, whereas the Bears basically Herschel Walker trade style fortified the franchise. And now the future's looking very bright for them as well. But it does seem pretty bright for Pats fans and the team as far as Drake Maye goes. Now, what did you guys think, especially since college football is your forte? What did PFF think of Drake Maye's final season at UNC, and what did you guys think of him heading into the NFL draft?
For me, he was pretty clearly the number two quarterback in the draft behind Caleb Williams. Now, I know Jayden Daniels has been lighting the league on fire right now. That take doesn't look great as for how good he's been. But I thought Drake, I would have taken him number two overall if I was Washington, honestly. And I was a big fan of him, right? You got all the tools you could want in the world, got a rocket launcher of an arm, really good mobility. I think really underrated mobility for a guy like him. And then I think he sees the field really well. I think his processing ability is pretty good. And I understand the inaccuracy sometimes was a little maddening. I think it was overblown, though, how inaccurate he actually was. I actually thought he was a really, really good quarterback overall. And that's another thing, too, that was so enticing about Drake Maye and why I wasn't, a lot of people were saying, oh, whoever goes to New England is going to stink because of that supporting cast. The one guy I was like, okay, I'm actually intrigued to see what he does there is Drake Maye, because at North Carolina, he didn't have the best supporting cast there either, right? The offensive line at North Carolina wasn't great. The receiving core wasn't all that great either. Play calling was up and down at times. I wasn't really a huge fan of play calling either. So, and he still made it work there, right? So he was the one quarterback who his supporting cast in college wasn't good, and now he goes to a team in the NFL whose supporting cast isn't good. He's proven to make it work before. That's a very, very intriguing thing about him is that, hey, for how good Jayden Daniels has been, I'm not taking anything away from him, but at LSU, he had Malik Neighbors, he had Brian Thomas Jr., he had an elite offensive line protecting him as well. Drake Maye never really had that, right, at North Carolina. So what he did more with less is what I'll say at North Carolina, which is why, for me at least, he was the number 2 quarterback in the draft.
Yeah, his first year that he started, when he led college football in total yards from scrimmage with over 5,100, was Josh Downs. He gets drafted. The best thing he had last year was Tez Walker, who is not exactly Justin Jefferson as well. And yeah, the play calling suffered, the line play suffered, and yet he still had an excellent season, enough to convince people to draft him that high, as well as to match up with your analytics. All right, so let's just get into last Sunday as well. I was at the stadium. Just looks the part, that you see the natural arm strength, just has QB1 written all over him. And we in New England we really haven't seen anything like this kind of modern, hyper athletic quarterback, period. Like Tom Brady was a different breed, obviously statuesque, and nobody did it better. But Cam Newton, old Cam Newton, no retread Cam Newton, not Mac Jones, not Bailey Zappi, certainly not Jacoby Brissett. But I think we walked away as fans and media pretty impressed. But what did the PFF analytics say about his debut against a really good defense in the Texans?
Yeah, that's the most important caveat you just said right there. Is that they played a really good defense. Like, there's a lot of people who, when they announced that Drake Maye would be starting this week, it's like, why would you do it this week? Why would you do it against the Texans defense that is ferocious, with a great defensive-minded head coach in D'Amico Ryans, who's probably licking his chops seeing a rookie quarterback make his debut against him? And a lot of people were saying, like, oh my God, it's going to be a disaster for Drake Maye in his first game. And it wasn't a disaster for him in his first game, right? He actually had the 18th highest grade of the week for quarterbacks, which, again, is below average by the league standards. But that's actually the highest graded debut for any first-round rookie quarterback, right? It was better than Jaden Daniels' debut. It was better than Caleb Williams' debut, better than Bo Nix's debut. It was the highest graded debut we saw from a first-round quarterback this year, right? So that's a very, very encouraging sign. And yes, obviously the debut for Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix and Caleb Williams came in week 1, but and Drake Maye has had a few weeks to sit and learn, but still, it's good to see that in his first career start, he wasn't lost out there. And I think that's the most important thing, is that the offensive line and receiving corps still weren't playing great against Houston, but he was processing it so fast. And that was something that was really, really encouraging to see, is that he was seeing the field. It wasn't too much for him out there. And that's a really, really good defense that he went up against. And he still didn't look out of place on the NFL field, which, if you don't look out of place as a rookie quarterback, that's a plus, right? So I was really encouraged by it. He didn't light the world on fire. It wasn't a Jaden Daniels versus the Cincinnati Bengals kind of performance, or even Caleb Williams this past week in the London game, how excellent he was. It wasn't like that, but it was a really, really good debut. And the fact that he was about a league average quarterback in his career debut as a starter, that's a really, really encouraging sign, I think, for the Patriots.
Yeah, no, he didn't step on his own toes. He didn't spit up on himself. He held his own. Sure, he made mistakes. Quite frankly, I was almost, I won't say happy, but I almost sort of breathed a sigh of relief when he airmailed that first interception, overthrew Pop Douglas, put it in the arms of the Texans linebacker or safety, whoever it went to. Like, okay, these things need to happen now. Like you said, this is a team that is not in win now mode. This is a team that is trying to get their quarterback's feet wet, develop him, bring him along, get him used to the pro game, and then see who else is going to be a helper, if you will. Who else is going to be part of the success going forward in 2025 and beyond on a team that, quite frankly, needs a lot. So who else would you say, PFF wise, who else grades out really high, and who looks right now, even though it's only 6 games in and one Drake Maye start in, who else on this Patriots roster looks like they may be part of the solution, not the problem?
Yeah, it's still a young team overall. I think that's the one thing I would say the most, is that this is still a young team that has a lot of pieces that they're hoping could be building blocks for the future. Demario Douglas, I've been impressed by this year. I think he's been a receiver that I think is still very young, obviously, like I said, but he's a guy that you can try to build around. I think he's been probably their most impressive receiver I've seen so far this year. And he hasn't been great, right? He hasn't been like lighting the world on fire either, but he's still a guy that I think, as a young guy, maybe not as a number 1, maybe not even as a number 2, but I think as your number 3 receiver, could be a really good player down the road. Keon White, I've been impressed by this year. Jabril Peppers has been really good this year. I think Jabril Peppers probably has been the best player on the entire team so far this year.
Yeah.
But Keon White has been a revelation. He kind of has having a little bit of a breakout year this year. So yeah, I think this is definitely a few guys to be encouraged by so far on this team. But this is still, like I said, this is still the worst team in the league just in terms of where they're picking in the NFL draft right now. there's still a lot to clean up offensively and even defensively as well. But at least you're starting to see some young players step up, which, again, for a rebuilding team, you want to see the young players step up. You don't want to see the veterans, right? You don't need, for a rebuilding team, you don't need veterans, right? You got to build for the future. And the fact that they're having some young players like Demario Douglas and Keon White start to play a lot better, you can start to see those guys as potential building blocks for the future.
Yeah, it's funny too. About some of those guys, like obviously Jabril Peppers is now currently embroiled in some off-field issues, so the defense has suffered significantly. As a matter of fact, right up the gut of the Patriots defense, which a lot of people, from traditional analysts to ones who incorporate a lot of contemporary statistics and analytics like Amina Kimes to all the way to PFF, really like the Patriots defense because you had a disruptive defensive lineman on the rise in Christian Barmore, a solid middle linebacker in Juwan Bentley, a hammer and thunder back there with Kyle Duggar and Jabril Peppers in the secondary. Now, Duggar's been hurt. Peppers may never see the field again. Bentley's out for the year. Barmore had the blood clots issue. So the Patriots' core of their defense has been gutted. It may be good in terms of seeing who they can develop and who's good for next year. But like you said, a team not in win now mode where you don't want to see veterans, that's ultimately why they probably traded away a Matthew Judon, got a third-round pick that hopefully they can use on depth or a starter next year going forward. As far as like how PFF creates your numbers and your grades and whatnot, there are probably a lot of fans in New England that take comfort in seeing like, hey, look, we got better grades than a lot of people said. And then there are the skeptics. So I'll bring up a couple of weeks ago when the Patriots lost to the Dolphins in a game that a lot of people said was quite possibly one of the worst professional football games ever played. And that's kind of being kind. They lost 15-10. Vidarian Lowe, who was a backup tackle who's been forced into starting duty and now has been injured twice this season, ended up with PFF's highest graded pass blocking tackle grade that particular week. And so, what can you say to people like on something like that, where they say like, geez, the tape doesn't seem to align to the grade to me. What am I missing? What are a lot of casual fans and analysts and broadcasters missing sometimes when those grades don't line up with what people think they see?
Yeah, well, listen, I'm just looking right now at that game against Miami, and he had 0 pressures allowed, no sacks allowed, no hits allowed. I mean, he did exactly what his job was in pass protection, right? So, yeah, I mean that was the kind of game that's like, yeah, that's a really good game. Like, obviously, you didn't allow anything at your quarterback. That's what you need to do as an offensive tackle, right? So, what we try to do though at PFF is grade every player. The impossible task of grading every player and every play in every game. And it's not going to, the one thing I always tell people is like, they think the grades, the people who think grades are end all be all, it's not the case, but also they're a very good indicator of who actually is playing well this year. Right. So it's another stat that we have. We have a lot of stats that you can look at. It's more than just a grades for us. Honestly, the grades are the most front facing one, I would say, out of all the stats we have, but it's not the only one. Right. So when you're trying to encompass how good a player actually is, the grade is just a part of it, right? It's a big part of it, don't get me wrong, but it's just a part of it. So we try to grade every player and every play and take into account the scheme, take into account what their assignment is on that play to the best of our abilities, right? We're not in the meeting rooms, or we don't have the playbook from every team, but we've been around this a long time. We've had players and coaches help out our grading system as well to tell us what to look for in certain plays. So we feel like we have a pretty good idea of what to look for on every play. So again, it's not going to be perfect. The grades will never, ever be perfect. And maybe they differ from what fans think or even what the teams think at times as well. But I do think it's one of the best stats you have out there. And it's a really good stat to see. Before PFF, really, there wasn't any way to tell how good an offensive lineman was, really. It was just, oh, this guy has started a lot of games in his career, so he must be good. No, that's not the case at all, right? So I think it's a really good indicator of just how good a player actually is. And you saw the Vidarian Lowe grade. I mean, that was a really, really good grade for him against Miami, and he didn't allow a single pressure in that game. So I think that showed why he had such a high pass blocking grade that week.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot to consume when you were raised in a traditional era where you didn't have a lot of these next generation analyticals and new statistics. And I've had to come around to what is average separation score, RAS, relative, like all these things now that it's too many acronyms. It's too many things. Like sometimes it's just, what did you see out there? I don't want to go old school football. Like, yeah, it looks like a football guy to me. So let's get him. I do have one side question before I get to my last Pat's question. Has PFF or like somebody like yourself ever gotten a call like right before the draft or even on draft night? Hey, we got these 2 guys on the board. What did PFF think about X versus Y?
No, I'm in content, so I'm not
Mhm.
really in. We have a B2B side too, a business to business side where they are very much in direct contact with these teams. I don't know if they ever gotten
Wow.
that kind of call before. I do know that we do help out teams and agencies and free agency. And obviously all the grades we have in college help out teams in the draft as well. I mean, you've seen, in all the behind the scenes draft videos, there's times where you can even see PFF's page pulled up on the big board, right? When they're
Yeah.
looking at all these players. So I know they use them. I've personally never gotten a call from a team or anything like that. I've gotten plenty of DMs from players, and I've talked to a lot of players, and they're all really good dudes. But I can't tell you firsthand that I've ever experienced that, but I do know for a fact that PFF is a very, very big part into one, how teams game plan during the week. And then
Mhm.
in the offseason, it's a really big part into who are they paying in free agency, who are they going after in free agency, and in the draft, like who are they going to try to pick in the NFL draft as well. So I know it's a big part of it. I don't know
Mhm.
if we've ever gotten a call like that late in the process or anything like that. So at the end of the day, like teams are going to trust themselves, right? They're not going to just blindly trust PFF and do that. But we are a tool, and we're a tool for them to use to help evaluate these players. So no, I've never gotten that call, but I'm sure that every team, every client, every team in the NFL and every team in the FBS is a client of ours. So I'm sure they all use PFF very heavily in their daily lives.
That's pretty impressive to put at the top of the PFF LinkedIn page. Every NFL team is a client.
Yeah.
That's better than the Hair Club for Men could ever say. Uh, uh, although I was just curious if I should like hook Elliot Wolf up with your number or have him slide into your DMs before next year's draft, because the glaring need that we barked and begged for all off season long of please fortify this line. If you're going to ever start Drake Maye, he needs a real line. That's why Jim Harbaugh wins, because he always starts with the boring version of like, well, you want to put a house up, it starts with the foundation. I'm not going to start in the kitchen or the master bedroom, you guys. And I understand that as unsexy as it is sometimes. I think we can all agree the Patriots need offensive line help and a wide receiver number 1 next year. So I'll ask you this 2-pronger to get out. How does Pro Football Focus, given the 11 games left, starting with the Jags this Sunday? I think the Jags are favored by 5.5. I'm kind of sensing some scoring going on at Her Majesty's Royal Game at Wembley on Sunday. So I'd just love to know what you guys think or how you guys see his season projecting out. And if there's anyone in college football, especially since that's your forte, Max, that you're in love with, that maybe we can, it's not even Halloween. This feels so weird, but if there's anyone else we can put on Pats fans' radar, we're all ears.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that Jags game is interesting. I'm excited to see Drake Maye against Trevor Lawrence in that one. That's gonna be really a really fun one. But listen, by all accounts, Patriots are. I know they're number 1 right now. They're probably gonna be picking at least top 5 in the NFL draft, right? So I know a lot of Patriots fans already are turning their attention to the NFL draft, which is an unfortunate thing for any fan base to do. Only a third of the way through the season, but as a massive fan of the NFL draft, I know it's always fun to talk about the NFL draft. So I'll put a few guys on the radars right now. I think it's a 2-horse race for OT1 in the NFL draft between Calvin Banks Jr. from Texas and Will Campbell from LSU. Cameron Williams from the right tackle from Texas is also really making a case too. But I think it's pretty clear that those two are the top. For me, I was a Will Campbell guy going into the year. Calvin Banks Jr. has outplayed him this year, and Calvin Banks Jr. has been one of the best offensive linemen in college football, and he's been outstanding his entire career. He started as a true freshman for Texas at left tackle, and he's been great for 3 years now, right? So I think in this kind of draft where there's not really a clear-cut number 1 quarterback, if the Patriots do end up with the number 1 pick and they don't end up trading the pick, Calvin Banks Jr. I could totally see being the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. I think Calvin Banks Jr. is a really, really good offensive tackle prospect that New England should have their eye on. So him or Will Campbell. I know Will Campbell's been constantly mocked to the Patriots as well.
Yeah.
Those are 2 guys that I think they should have an eye on. And then for receiver wise, if you don't go the offensive line route, which I think you probably should, but if for some reason you don't, Tedero McMillan, the Arizona receiver, he's like your classic X receiver. He's 6'6". He's unbelievable hands, great body control. And he is a guy that it moves well for that size too. Like my co-host Dalton Wasserman has constantly made the comparison to Mike Evans, right? And that's the kind of receiver that I know he's not going to be maybe not a Hall of Fame type receiver like Mike Evans is, but you see the body type, and you see the movement ability like a Mike Evans. So Tedero McMillan, and even hey, if the Patriots still want help in that secondary and they need help in the receiving core, you can also go with Travis Hunter with the number 1 overall pick too. He's probably the best football player in college football right now. That's what I would make the argument for because of how elite he is on both sides of the ball. And I think he might not be a full-time starter in the NFL on both sides, but I think a team would be wise to at least play him on both sides of the ball. So I think they should go offensive line. And if you're going to go with the top offensive lineman, for me at least right now, is Kelvin Banks Jr. But Will Campbell's in the mix, Tedder McMillan's in the mix, and obviously Travis Hunter is always in the mix as well as the best football player of the draft. So it's a really, really interesting year this year. But it is a really good year for New England to have a top 5 pick because there's 2 really good offensive linemen that can go with a top 5 pick.
And those are glaring needs on them on this team as well. And a left tackle, people always say a wide receiver 1 can be a quarterback's best friend. Yeah, but also a left tackle that keeps a clean sheet and a clean jersey and keeps him off his ass can also be a best buddy. And I assume it's safe to assume that you guys see an upward trajectory for the rest of the season for Drake Maye.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the fact that he was that good in his debut against an elite defense, that's really encouraging for the rest of the year. Right. And like I said, it was the highest graded debut of any rookie quarterback that we've seen this year. So yeah, I was really, really impressed. Again, it wasn't like an elite performance by him by any means. He wasn't one of the best quarterbacks in the entire week in the league,
Sure.
But he was an average quarterback, which average for a rookie quarterback is really, really good. Right. So yeah, that was a really encouraging performance. And I definitely think he's on an upward trajectory right now. It wasn't like he went up against the Carolina Panthers or any team like that who's just rough right now. He went up against a legit playoff contender with a legit defense, and he still looked at least average out there in his career debut. So yeah, there's definitely an upward trajectory for Drake Maye.
It's so incredible how far we have fallen or how things change so quickly in the NFL to think that like an average quarterback play will be excellent for us. And the fact that he had the first 50-yard touchdown in over 3 years, first guy to lead in rushing and passing, had 3 passing touchdowns. We've had to adjust our standards as well, but it's good to know that the grades and the numerics from a place like PFF back up what we've seen passing the eye test once again, that they may have gotten a real one in Drake Maye. Once again, give him a follow at CFB Max Chadwick. He is the host of the College Football Show for Pro Football Focus and a college football analyst for PFF, who once again can boast that every single team in the NFL is a client of theirs, and it's well served. Max, next time I'm in the Natty, I'll treat you to some of that Cincinnati Skyline chili ice cream, or at least a cold beer. We appreciate the time, brother. Thanks again.
I won't be down for the ice cream, but I'm certainly down for the beer. So yeah, anytime you're in the city, let me know.
Right on, my man. Thanks so much. This has been the latest Six Rings and Football Things, brought to you by WEEI Odyssey and 2400 Sports. For our producer, Terp, Andy Hart, who couldn't be here today, our excellent guest, Max Chadwick from CFB. This is your old pal, Nick Fitzy Stevens, saying good day, God bless, and as always, go Pats.